Do not adjust your sets. No, your eyes do not deceive you. It is I and my podcast partner, Hamish McClay, back once again. Really, this is a further promo to the earlier morning's session with Ted. Now I'm going to mangle his name again. Baillieu, is that right, Hamish?
Sounds about right to me.
Yes, where we were talking all things cladding, but really highlighting the lessons that should have been learned 9 years ago when he and the team there decided to learn from the horrendous disaster that was that befell here with cladding in Grenfell, and put together a task force to improve that. This is a particularly poignant one, isn't it, Hamish?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And we won't spend very long on here. We don't actually apologise for the fact that it was an extended one, because we'd actually kept Ted up 12 hours ahead of us over there in Australia, where Ted is. He was the former Premier of Victoria, and so it was him, as Gareth said, but it was an all-party. What they made sure of was the fact that it was not just a single party that was held to be responsible for it. Well worth listening into just for that very, very fact. To be perfectly honest, there is really very little to add, because we need to get Ted back, because it was fascinating information. And the saddest thing of the lot is we have not learned from speaking to Ted. They had a big disaster earlier on in Victoria, which was one of the reasons why they set up their working party. They came over here, looked and saw what happened at Grenfell, and they've sorted out 75% of it. They've still got finer details. However, we still haven't sorted out any of the details, it would appear, because everybody's trying to brush it under the carpet.
9 years on, and it's barely lip service. I mean, only just now the shroud is going on round Royal Artillery Quays, and they're still purporting to be leaving on flammable materials on the lift shaft. It's on the staircase shaft. It's ridiculous. But without any further ado, thank you very much for coming back on, Hamish. Hope you guys are ready. This is an excellent conversation, and we'll start it now. And see you on the other side. And until next week, take care. Justice coming right on time as ever. Here we are at Cladding Matters, the weekly show where we talk about all things related to cladding, those affected by cladding, and more importantly, reparations and so on. As usual, we have Steve Day of buildingsafetyscheme.org, and of course our Lord and Master Hamish McClay of Search and Convey. And today's special guest is Ted I'm going to mangle this, but bear with. Baillieu? Did I get that right? Oh, lovely, the former Premier of Victoria, who's taken a personal interest in proceedings and has agreed to come on the show to give an opine. And I hope you find this of great interest. However, to start us off, as per usual, and before we get going, actually, I should say what today's topic is. This is Australia's cladding reforms and the UK challenge. And as ever, Hamish McClay to start us off.
Well, we're highly privileged today, and it's morning. It happens to be morning here in the UK. However, Ted, we find in the latter part of the evening. But it's great to have him. In fact, it's one of the tremendous aspects we've had just over the last few weeks. We've had one of them, a member from the House of Lords. We had a member from the House of Parliament, and now we bring in Ted all the way from Australia, who has himself worked on cladding challenges that they've had, particularly in sort of Victoria, where Ted was the former Premier. Now, one of the major aspects and the challenges we faced in the UK, and I'm sure it wasn't the case where Ted was, but I do feel that we ought to mention this again, it has become a very, very political issue here in the UK, where we've actually sort of found that local councils, instead of wanting to represent and look after the welfare of their residents, are more interested in actually following what the builders, what the developers are trying to say to them that they want to be doing. And this is a sad aspect. And central government is as bad as, because they in fact are the ones that dictate. And what we found far too often throughout the United Kingdom, wherever we have had, and Steve we know is undergoing remediation at this particular moment in time, it's only partial remediation. They're keeping all the dangerous materials there. And Ted, in fact, was actually has tested some of these materials over there in Australia, so knows exactly what the state of them is. So let me pass on to the experts. Steve is living within it, and Ted has been working on it. So those are the people that can give us the greatest amount of information today, I feel.
Well, first of all, let me bring Steve onto the into the show. Welcome, as usual, Steve. So very pleased to have Ted here, but give me a flavour of the topic for today.
Well, it's wonderful to have Ted here, and I mean the most challenging aspect that I find with the whole cladding issue and building safety issue is it seems that around the world, not just the UK and Australia as a case in point, that cladding seems to be the thing they deal with. It's all about dealing with cladding, and Ted can sort of speak more about this, but there are other building safety defects, and indeed at Royal Artillery Quays they're trying to the Greenwich Council are saying that we don't have any defects, and that is basically meaning that we'll have some of our cladding taken off, some of it will stay on because of our watered down PAS 9980 standard, but the killer stuff, which has caused a massive fire in Richmond House, completely took out the entire building. It was all internals. And the Olympic Park, a prestigious block of flats, £432 million worth of internal defects. And yet you're here, cladding is the only thing that matters. Of these internal defects, and I'm not the expert here, and we'll hear from Ted, need to come out too. And I do think, and we'll go over to Ted maybe, and it is seen as a cladding issue in Australia, isn't it, Ted? They've got a cladding task force and everything.
Ted, welcome to the show. It seems to me that when you take the outside frock off, the underskirts seem to be full of and riddled. Is that the case?
Well, I'll keep my frock on, Gareth.
You're doing your own time, your own business, sir.
It might be darkness here and lightness there, but there's Diwali festival and it's the battle between light and dark. And it's a nice metaphor for what's happening in Japan. And I'm an architect by profession, practicing architect by profession, who became a politician, who became the Premier of Victoria, which is our southeastern state. And we're fairly parochial in Victoria, and Melbourne is the capital of Victoria, and Melbourne was the capital of Australia for 27 years after Federation in 1901. So had a fair role to play in Australia. And ironically, one of the first cladding fires was in Melbourne, and that was in one of our high-rise towers in November 2014.
Wow.
A tower called La Crosse. And of course, that raised a few eyebrows at the time, but not enough eyebrows to make a real difference. There was an inquiry in our Australian Senate, which didn't really lead anywhere. There was a bit more attention paid to the issue, but that's about it. And then when the tragedy of June 27, 2017 occurred, the Victorian government then, and still is, a Labor government, and I was a Liberal, or you would say conservative, Premier of Victoria, and I finished up in 2014. I left Parliament in 2014. And the then Labor Premier, recognising that they had appointed me to some other building type issues, asked me to head up a task force to look at the impact that Grenfell would have on the building industry. And we did some things in that task force right from the start, which I think made a significant difference. The first thing I said to the then Premier was, I'm prepared to do it, but only if it's bipartisan. I don't want to be the fall guy on the other side of politics for whatever we recommend. So he gave me a co-chairman, John Thwaites, and John and I had known each other for 40 years, and John had been on our Australian Building Codes Board, not an architect or an engineer himself, but he had been planning minister and on the National Construction Code decision-making body. So he had some experience as well. And we'd always had respect for each other. So the first thing was we made it bipartisan, and that was critical to what we did. And the second thing I said to the then Premier was, I'll do it, but only on the basis that we focus on public safety first. And there's plenty of other interests, the builders' issues, residents' issues, the legal issues, the government's issues, but it had to be about public safety. And he allowed us to commit to that. And the third thing was probably a silly thing to do in hindsight, given the time that's been involved, but we both insisted that we not be paid to do the job.
Yeah, that may have been a silly move, but I'm far be it from me to say.
It's a good move because that
we didn't want to be accused of profiting from other people's misery.
Well, yes.
Nor did we want to create a cottage industry that just went on and on and on and never had an outcome. And so what we did was we set up a committee with the heads of various government departments, which we called the Victorian Cladding Task Force. And we set up an industry body as well, which was the second committee meeting. And we made a few important decisions. And the first was that we would go and find the problems, not wait for them to appear. So it was about public safety, and every meeting we had, we reiterated this is about public safety. And we went out and found the problems. We went through councils, we found the problems, and we created, with the help of the department, a tool to audit buildings with, so that could be used amongst those we employed to do the inspections. And I'd been part of an inspection service of buildings as a professional, so I had some idea of what you needed to do. And we got started with the help of the department, and as it happened, I had to be in London for another project in July, I think it was, of 2017, just a few weeks after the fire. And I took the opportunity to go and see Grenfell. I met with all sorts of people, ministers. I met with Dame Judith at the time, and the head of, I've forgotten what you call your fire inspection service there, the academic group, the research group. Went out there. Sorry?
Building research group? Or
Building research, thank you. And I think I even met a relatively young Robert Jenrick at the time, who had a sort of responsibility at the time. So it was happenstance, but it was also horrifying. I remember standing in the community centre next to Grenfell and just looking up at the tower. And I had watched it live in my office on my computer screen at the time. And for me, the greatest tragedy of all is that it remains there, still shrouded, and still no charges laid. Nothing has come after, now we're close to 9 years, I think, now getting closer to 9 years, and nothing has come to pass. So within a few months, we had produced an interim report. I think it was November 2017, and that made a number of recommendations to complete the audit and do a number of other things of an independent nature, use the tool on a widespread basis. And we report, and we found in that first report that there was clearly a cultural problem, there was a compliance problem, and there was a product chain problem. So they were the first three findings. But we set about getting into the detail, and it was, I think, in mid-2019 that we produced a final report. And that final report recommended a number of important things. The first, that the government should establish an independent body to do the fix. And that was a big step, and it was a diversion from what was happening in the rest of the world to create an independent body to do the fix. And we recommended that the government set aside funds to do it, which they did. They agreed to that. And as a result of that, we had a very simple saying that we attached ourselves to, which is find, fix, and fund. And worry about the future later. We had to, in the name of public safety, find the problems, fix the problems, and fund the problems. And along the way, give the government to the chance to legally recover from those who might have been responsible. And we stuck to that, and there were a bunch of recommendations that went along with that of a more technical nature. And one of those was to bring back what we used to call the clerk of works on a building site. So it's an independent person on the building sites. And that's happened. And the Cladding Safety Victoria was set up as an independent body, ironically set up and led by somebody who'd been responsible for opposing me when we won government in 2010. But nevertheless, we've got on very well, and a fellow named Dan O'Brien, and we got on very well, and we've stuck to the knitting. And Cladding Safety Victoria have done a pretty good job. They've looked at about 2,000 or 3,000 buildings. They've remediated, I think it's in the order of 1,500 at present. It's still going on. And they've made lots of other recommendations and changes along the way. So from that point of view, we did things that no one else had done. And I think the government put in place the capacity for them to assume the legal rights to pursue malefactors in the courts. That's still yet to be played out. It's not an easy thing to do. But what we found along the way, and this was particularly of interest to me because I'd been involved with building inspections, that it wasn't just cladding. Everywhere our auditors went, they found other problems, and not insignificant problems. And we were encouraged at our government task force level to know you're tasked with just looking at cladding, don't worry about those things. Well, John and I both agreed that we had a duty of care to draw public attention to these issues. Now, we probably didn't get sufficient or enough public attention to those issues as we would have liked, but they got listed in our report, and they were significant issues, and that has continued to dominate debate in this country. Now, the other states of Australia have done the cladding part differently, but I might pause there just to see if you'd like to ask any questions about the cladding side of this. But we
Ted, your motto was find, fix, fund. In the UK, it seemed to have been ignore, hide, and brush under the carpet, seems to be our motto. Steve, why is it that the country where it actually hadn't happened, they didn't have a literal meltdown appear in front of them, but they learned from ours, took action? Ted created or was responsible for 50% of a task force, which not only came up with an insanely easy to remember motto, but also actually acted upon it. Here we are 9 years later, and we seem to have got no further than they turning up at your block with the idea of removing the cladding, but doing nothing about the effective firelighters still attached to the fire safety shaft.
Well, I mean, there's a few lessons there. I mean, I think what's striking is that, Ted said that there's a massive fire that happened in Australia, and there was some note taken, but not enough, and it had to take Grenfell for there to be a reaction, because it was just so egregious and so shocking, and really showed the corruption in the industry. And I think I echo what Ted says. I think after two report, 2 public inquiries, and there's still not one conviction. And they're now dismantling the Grenfell Tower because it's quite convenient to do that, because they don't really want anyone to know that there's still loads of convictions pending. But yeah, but what I will say is it's interesting that that progress was made on the independent body looking at the. I think that's very key, because it's not that independent in our world. We've got MHCLG, which is the government housing department, who have put down taxpayer funds to fund the remediation, but they're also signatory to the PAS 9980 watered down standard, which ignores building regulation breaches at the time of construction and allows, if a fire risk engineer says it's fine to leave on, as you're seeing at Royal Artillery Quays with our fire shafts, then they can ignore their peers. And I've had 2 other independent fire engineers say, do not leave XPS panels on single escape stairs going up 16 stories. That you just take the one that you like, really, if you're the builder. And there's obviously conflicts of interest there, because that fire engineer probably wants a bit more work from Barratt. And, this is the problem. We've got a watered down standard. And one of the things we're trying to do at the moment in the House of Commons and House of Lords is to change that partial remediation standard, so they actually go back to the definition in the Building Safety Act of building safety risk, which covers breaches of building regs and will not allow this PAS standard to go on. But it'd be interesting to go back to Ted, though. What standard did they remediate the cladding to in Australia, in Victoria? Was it building regulations, current ones, or did it make it at the time of construction, or was there a watered down standard too?
Well, it has moved a little over time, but it started off as safety based and risk. It was a risk assessment that was made of every property. So the standard was to move from high and extreme risk down to low risk. And
the insurers take it, Ted. Did the insurers bring down the premiums after a remediation happened?
Well, the issue of insurance is a separate thing altogether. And one of the very first meetings we held, I raised the issue that probably the most powerful people in this debate will be the lawyers and the insurers.
Yeah.
And nothing has changed in that regard. And we'll move on a little later, and I'll talk to you about what's happened to insurance. But all those other safety issues popped up. Obviously, we've had concrete cancer in the past, but the audits revealed significant plumbing issues, ventilation, power issues, still asbestos issues, defective glass, silicosis, structural issues. Even the fire protection systems themselves were faulty steel, and we've had some buildings, high-rise buildings in New South Wales, with structural issues which eventually will be demolished because all the residents have had to move out. And one of the most significant ones that was drawn to our attention, but it hasn't had the public attention it deserves, is defective wiring, much of it imported. And the warnings were given to us as a committee that the wiring problems are likely in time to be worse than the cladding problems. So watch this space, because these are worldwide issues. But along the way, I think we had caused sufficient stir to gather attention, and I was then invited to address members of Parliament in the UK, which I did, and presented pretty much in a longer form what I told you about here. And I don't claim that cladding safety, our recommendations were perfect, because effectively we're risk-based, so with the medium risk and the low risk were probably put aside. But at least we got something done, and we got it up and running fairly quickly, and money was assigned. But I was obviously pursuing the safety issue. And what I discovered, because I found myself being invited on multiple occasions, and by this time COVID had taken control, so it was all by Zoom, that I was being discouraged from talking about building safety because that was getting in the way of the debate about the future of leasehold.
Oh, you mean in the UK?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, from my observation, debate in the UK has been completely sidelined by those who wish to go from leasehold to commonhold. And Australia operates on a commonhold. We call it strata title in Australia, and we have owners corporations which look after their buildings. The point I made in those debates was, well, if you think shifting from leasehold to commonhold is going to protect you from these systemic defects, be very careful, because it hasn't protected us in Australia. But nevertheless, all the focus seemed to be on, if we go to commonhold, everything will be solved. And my counsel has been, that's not the case. Fine, if you want to go to commonhold, but fix your problems first, fix your defects first. Otherwise, you'll fix the defect and fine under your Building Safety Act that you no longer, or under whatever act it is, you'll find that you've no longer got the right under commonhold to have your defects fixed and paid for by somebody else because they're excluded.
That's correct. You could lose your protections under the Building Safety Act if you're enfranchised by the freehold.
Yeah, so anybody who happens to be watching this from the UK, you think getting rid of leasehold is going to save you from the defects. It's actually going to multiply your problems.
So it's out of one frying pan into another frying pan, really?
Well, no, from the frying pan into the furnace, because there's no way out.
Yeah.
There's no way out. You'll have to pay for your defects. And a lot of people aren't paying for their defects. They're paying for it with a loss of capital value in their properties. And a lot of people are paying for it with bankruptcy and tragically with their lives.
Yeah.
As Steve knows all too well, as I'm sure you all know too well.
Yeah.
Steve, I'd like to pass over to you before we finish up today, because we are running intentionally a little bit long, but that's good. Steve, would you give us some final words, please, before I give it to Hamish to sum up?
Well, I mean, what we need to do is divide the debate in the UK back to where it was, and that's what we're going to be trying to do in Parliament with the Planning and Infrastructure Bill, where the debates are starting in 3 weeks' time. And we've got Gideon Amos, who we've had on the Cladding Matters. He's going to be backing it as Lib Dem policy. And we've got the Earl of Lytton, obviously, in the House of Lords, with Baroness Pinnock, going to be raising the amendments. And what we need to do is say building safety is its own issue, and then everything else, needs to be handled separately. And as Ted says, it's not the silver bullet. Please, if you're watching this, do not listen to people that say, oh, commonhold will save you from bills around building safety defects. Those bills will still exist. And what's worse is your resident management company, you may have to be in it, and you may have to ask people for 30 or 40 grand for their building defects because there's no longer protection for you under the Building Safety Act. This is a real risk, and we need protections that cover all buildings of all heights. We need to do the remediations for cladding as well as all building safety risks, including structural and the wiring and everything else, which is covered under the building safety risk definition. One of the things that
I found interesting is Lord Lytton's amendment, which I followed in detail and tried to contribute to in whatever way I could from afar. Absolutely. I think it offers the building industry worldwide a solution for the long term. And I can't say how much I despaired at what the fellow Conservative government was doing or not doing. And I can't say, and I had high hopes for a change of attitude when there was a change of government. It hasn't changed anything at all. And then recently, I think I did a count of the number of housing ministers that have been in the UK since 2000. And I got to 25, and it depends how you describe housing minister. And it's a situation where no one wants to know. Everybody is fighting to be under the rug. There's no room under the rug anymore.
I think that could be a little bit, Ted, because they perceive that their days are short. So they want to do as little as possible to rile anyone, unless their days are even shorter.
Yeah, well, there's a great hidden accord between big government big builders and big developers and big unions.
Mm.
And it's the little guys that get hurt as a consequence. And we've seen that in Victoria. And we've had some building reform. I won't bother you with all the details about that. One of those is the introduction of decennial insurance, which has worked, I think, in France, but will struggle in Victoria, it looks like. But we've still got all these building safety issues because we don't have the tradies. We don't have the investment because government here is on a build, baby, build platform. And it doesn't matter how long it takes or how much it costs. All the tradies have gone over to them because they're paid so well. And that's left all these defects unaddressed and longer term problems. So it is a real problem for people buying an apartment in Victoria, and it's true across Australia. Every jurisdiction's done it differently in Australia.
Well, thank you very much for enlightening us, and thank you so much for coming on the show, Ted. Hamish, would you care to take us home?
Well, I mean, Ted has just touched very lightly what is actually sort of going on. There's some greater in-depth aspects of the whole thing that really ought to be investigated, and I do hope we can sort of drag Ted out on another evening to come along and actually sort of speak to us a little bit more, because when we actually sort of see what Ted was trying to do much earlier, it's strange. I mean, Steve mentioned this. It took Grenfell. When Ted and his team actually saw the results of Grenfell, there was a realization. We haven't yet had a realization. I mean, Grenfell wasn't our first, and it certainly won't be our last. One would hope that at least some of the dangers will be removed. But the most important thing of the lot is really that collaboration work that Ted spoke about. It needs to be, and I mean, it seems strange to me that we just have one party which is taking a specific interest within the Houses of Parliament. The House of Lords is a little bit different because we have the Earl of Lytton. And let us just hope that this is going to spread, and many people from other parties are going to realise that it's not just a UK problem, it's a worldwide problem, and it does need to be resolved together. Speak to the experts, speak to what's happened in Australia, speak to Ted and see where he feels things have fallen down there. There's a tremendous exchange that needs to be taken care. And unfortunately, while this persists, we still have local governments who are really not taking any interest in the safety of their residents, as has been demonstrated in Greenwich. We really need to devote a programme to that as well. One of our programs.
A sobering thought to depart with, Gareth. Since Grenfell, and we tracked them, there have been over 70 high-rise fires around the world, the majority of which have been cladding connected.
Wow.
And many of them just as spectacular and but not quite as tragic as Grenfell. So the problem's not going away, and as I said, you can hide under the rug, but eventually somebody's going to stomp you to pieces if you're stuck under the rug.
Well, there you go. Yes, another Cladding Matters full of intrigue and in some ways slightly unsurprising. I don't know whether we're all being jaundiced and slightly cynical by the whole thing, but you'd have thought 9 years later, I mean, goodness gracious, Ted and his team have learnt the bloody lesson. It's a shame that we couldn't apply it over here where it actually happened. But there you go. Once again, thank you so much, Ted, for taking time out of your evening to be with us. Steve Day from Building Safety Scheme for being here as ever, reporting from the front line, as it were, and Hamish McClay, who helped set this thing up in the first place. And to all of you out there, there will be more, I realise, and I thank you all for staying with us on this slightly extended Cladding Matters, but I think you'll agree it was worth it. And there'll be more.
Happy to join you anytime, Gareth, embalmed or not.
There you go. And just bear in mind, we will be repeating this show later on today. So if you missed this or just caught the end, about 1 o'clock UK time GMT, there'll be another copy of it with a short introduction from Hamish and myself just to get us going. But thank you once again to all of you who stuck with us. And as ever, keep your feet on the ground, keep reaching for the stars, and please look after your mental health. Until next week, in fact, later on today. Goodbye.
Thanks.
what are we facing?